Be advised, Mary 2027 associates with the suspect and the victim.
Hello, everyone, and we want to welcome you to today's edition of On the Legal Side, where we talk about the legal issues involving the private security, loss prevention, public safety, private police industries across our country. And today we're talking about something that we have covered numerous times, probably 3 or 4 over the last 15 years, but because of recent events involving off-duty police officers and employees of stores and businesses as well as private security, we have seen the need to really rehash and talk about this issue again. So today's episode of this edition from the legal side, on the legal side, all about the legal issues we're talking about when we hire off-duty police officers, and 8 different areas that you really need to think about, to cover with certain documents, as well as discuss with the officer prior to him or her coming on the property and being on duty. So let's get right into this and kick this right off, because there have been a number of issues in the last 3 or 4 months, and some local Better Business Bureaus and even Chamber of Commerces have gotten involved, and they don't really have a grasp on what off-duty officers are supposed to do while working for another employer, or what their authority is on that property. So today we're going to cover this, as we have for several of them. And even you might want to discuss this when you are hiring off-duty law enforcement. You probably need to know these areas as well, and even discuss them with your local Chamber of Commerce or Better Business Bureau, because there definitely are issues. So let's get right into this today. I'm your host, Rick McCann, founder and CEO of Private Officer International, a law enforcement officer myself for many years, as well as the owner of a private security company and several private security and public safety related businesses. So that's why I'm addressing this one more time, because it is really an important issue. All right, many businesses, nightclubs, convenience stores, churches, car lots, you name it, and they probably either do or have at one time hired off-duty law enforcement to provide security for their property. Now, they're not providing, intentionally anyways, any law enforcement type duties. Most of your off-duty officers' main objective in this off-duty job is really just to earn an income and provide some physical presence of extra security for that business owner. There are really 2 different categories of off-duty officers, and this is something, as a business owner, you really need to know how it's operated in your area. 2 different categories and methods of hiring off-duty law enforcement from your local police department, sheriff's department, state police, county police. You need to understand how they process the request for off-duty police to work businesses. And it's not all the same, and some do it differently, but there are 2 main categories. Number 1, you're going to find in some of the metropolitan areas what's called a secondary employment office within that police or sheriff department. The secondary employment office authorizes certain police officers to work off-duty, but the secondary employment office at the police department, they have someone in charge of that unit. They will schedule those hours and that officer. They will find the officer to cover that shift. So let's say a grocery store is having a special sale. They're going to have a massive amount of people in for the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and they want to hire 2 off-duty police officers whose main objective is going to be crowd control, traffic control, and to curb any type of theft that might occur during this special event. Well, the secondary employment office would be that agency, kind of like a private security force, if you will, that would schedule that event. They would staff those hours with off-duty law enforcement, and they would invoice this business for the hours. So in a secondary employment setup, normally the law enforcement agency, police, sheriff, state police, whoever it might be, they might charge $45 an hour for that police officer, and they're going to pay that officer $35 or $36 or $38. They take the remainder of that fee, that hourly rate, to subsidize the insurance for the officer, because when an officer is off duty and working a secondary job, whether it be traffic control or nightclub security or at the local mall, he's off duty, and he is not covered by his police agency's insurance company because he's off duty. The police department's insurance only covers those on duty. So with the secondary employment office, they do have a secondary insurance policy to cover. It's called a professional law enforcement policy, and it covers off-duty work, anything that might happen, whether the officer gets into a scuffle, gets sued by the person they arrest, or they get involved in a shooting and there's a lawsuit, whatever it might be. That secondary insurance policy will cover the officer, not the police department. Their policy will not kick in at that point. Additionally, the secondary employment office is supposed to have workers' compensation insurance, just like any employer, that again will cover that officer for any injuries that they sustain. If they sustain head injury because they've been kicked, punched, knocked down, and they have to go to the hospital, then that, insurance, workers' comp, is going to cover them in that incident. So the secondary employment office, they're going to hold back some of the money from the billable rate, and they're going to pay that, and then oftentimes they also get a piece of that to pay for the staffing of that secondary employment office. Now, not in any way at all, not one iota, are the police agency, the police department, supposed to profit from them other than to pay the insurance and pay for the staffing of the secondary employment office. So that's one way that private businesses and even citizens can go ahead and hire law enforcement to provide extra security, traffic control, crowd control, and to help them. During the Christmas season, every year, department stores such as, Macy's, Walmart, Costco, Sam's Club, Dillard's, Kohl's, all of these giant big box and shopping malls will hire off-duty law enforcement, and their job is to do foot patrol, direct traffic, detect and detour some of the shoplifting, and to provide law enforcement assistance to mall security or store security when there's a shoplifting incident or another type of investigation until on-duty officers can get there. Now, in my own arrangement, I've worked with off-duty officers at both big box stores and shopping malls. Normally, when we had a shoplifter, a trespasser, or some other crime in progress, we would take them into custody, have the off-duty officers take control of that person. We even had at one mall a processing substation, so they went down there. We'd take them down with law enforcement, and they would call on-duty law enforcement. They would come in and handle the investigation and process the prisoner. In other situations, shopping malls and department stores and bars and restaurants can employ police in a second category, which is called direct. So you have the secondary employment, which is indirect. You have to go through the police department. Then you have direct employment, depending on the policy of the agency and department, where you can employ either an individual officer that you know, you like, you've done business with, direct, and pay him at the end of the night, pay him his fee, whatever that might be, $200, $300, $500, whatever the rate is, pay him direct, and he has to provide his own insurance, both workers' comp to cover his injuries if he's injured, as well as general liability in case he is sued. It's very important that if you are hiring, either way, direct or through a secondary employment office, that you get a copy of the insurance and that you actually get on that insurance as a payee in case there is an incident. Make sure that one way or the other, the officer that's doing that secondary employment, the officer working that off-duty job, is covered by insurance. Because if you think, well, nothing's going to happen, he's a good guy, I've known him myself for years, and he's a good officer, and, he's level-headed, and now we don't have any real trouble here, we just need a little extra presence. And then all of a sudden one night, you get a customer who's a loudmouth. He doesn't want to leave. He causes a big commotion. The officer has to put hands on him to take him into custody. A fight ensues. The man resists. You got a knockout, drag out brawl on your hands. Everybody gets injured, and everybody's got to be seen by the hospital, and now you're going to have some liability issues as a business, whether you're a church, a bar, nightclub, grocery store, big box, whatever you might be. If you're employing that secondary officer, the off-duty officer, there's going to be some liability issues, and then there's going to be some questions. Who's going to pay the bill? Who's going to pay the doctor? Who's going to pay the ER? Who's going to pay for the prescription? Who's going to pay the ambulance? Nothing is free, folks. Even if you're in a small rural area that has a VFD, a volunteer fire department, and maybe a volunteer rescue, these days we charge to come out to see you. We charge to transport you. Rescue squads may still call themselves volunteers, but I guarantee you they're going to charge you. They're going to send you a bill to take you to the hospital because nothing's free. We have to have operational costs just like any other business, and now it's going to cost to take you to the hospital. So somebody has to pay. And if you don't have a copy of the officer's insurance or the insurance from the agency, then you, as a business owner, you might get stuck with that bill, and you might have to pay the person who's been arrested. You might have to pay for the officer. You might have to pay for anybody else who was injured during the melee. It could come out to be a real mess, especially if you don't know who's covered. And the business owner, if they have insurance, the church, if they have insurance, which they probably do, their insurance will get involved, and they might pay the claim. They might not pay the claim. But if they do pay the claim, they're going to come back to the people that were involved and try to collect that money that they've had to pay out in the claim. And that could be through the course of a lawsuit. Yes, insurance companies do file lawsuits against people to collect money that they're paying out for injuries, damages, lawsuits, whatever it might be. One way or the other, somebody's paying up. Nothing is free. So as a business, and I see this all the time, especially with nightclubs and churches, please be sure that you understand who's covered by the insurance, whose insurance is being used. Is this a secondary employment operation that goes directly through the police department, the sheriff, or is this a direct pay where the officer is being paid and is liable for his own insurance? And if he is, make sure you get a copy of that insurance and make sure that you get named, indemnified. Make sure that you are included. It's very, very important. The next real issue that we're having here is that most of the time you don't have a written contract. You don't have anything down in writing. It might have been a handshake. With a secondary employment coming through the police agency, a lot of times they do have at least a one-page, 2 or 3 paragraph contract. kind of spells out the hours, the billable hourly rate, the duties that you want the officer to have. And so that's a little bit of a helpful tool to have, and also it really comes in handy whenever there's a dispute. Rather than he said, she said, we said, maybe we misunderstood, I'm not sure what happened. Now you have it in writing. Have a written contract. It doesn't matter that you're a church and that they've been working for you for the last 3 or 4 years, that they're a member of your congregation. If he's working for you and you're paying him or her or them, yeah, you need a contract. Without that agreement, without those signatures, when something really happens, I don't care if they've been a member of the church for 20 years, they're going to lay the blame on the church. They're going to say, well, you said, you told me to do it. You direct me. No, we talked about it. Remember when we sat over there? And it's going to be back and forth. Churches are businesses. They're going to protect their interest. They're going to protect themselves if there's a liability issue, if there's a lawsuit, if somebody gets injured. So you've got to have it in writing. Otherwise, you're going to be up the creek without a paddle. We see it all the time with nightclubs. Same thing. And other businesses. You have a handshake maybe. You have some words over the phone. Okay, yeah, I need a cop over here, 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. Need them here Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, I'll see you then. All right. Yo, how much? You want $43 an hour? All right. Yeah, we'll pay you $43 an hour. All right. We got a deal. I'll see you Thursday night, bud. All right. Bye. And you hang up. And now, all of a sudden, you think you've got a clear understanding. In the legal field, when we're talking about contracts, it's called meeting of the minds. Do you have a true meeting of the minds? Do you understand what he understands? Did she hear what you said? And did you understand what they said they're going to do? What time will they be there? What are their duties? How much are you paying them per hour? And when will they collect their pay? Will it be that day? Will it be sent to them in a week? Are you going to send them a check? Will your CPA send a check? All these things that you think everyone understands, all of a sudden, it's not so well understood. It's like, okay, I'm not quite sure. Then on Thursday night, they show up at 7:15. And you're like, hey, dude, I said 6 p.m. Oh, yeah, well, I kind of forgot about exactly what time. I thought it was 7, but I was running a little behind. My kid had soccer. My wife got home late from work. And it's just like if you're dealing with any other employee, security guard company, or direct employee, you have the same type of problems. And, of course, not being written out, not being something on paper. Now, again, you're going back to the he said, oh, I understood one thing, and you said something else, and we misheard, and you have an issue. And you don't want to start off that way, especially when you're employing law enforcement, because they have long memories. I don't want to say that they're going to do anything bad against you. Hopefully they won't. But, these are people that we do have to work with and see in our community every day. We want to try and keep them on, our side, So there are definitely issues. We want to find out about who's, are they direct? Are we paying them? Are they through a secondary employment? And I'll tell you, to back up just a little bit, we found out 2 years ago that some police departments are hiring a second employment company that is like a staffing firm, and they're actually doing the staffing. Now, this is not something that occurred when I was in law enforcement. This is not something, or, in my early days of law enforcement, this is not something that is normal. But in the last few years, we've seen several companies rise up to take over the scheduling and staffing of off-duty officers because it took up too much time of the police department own time, and so they've hired this out, just like many things are being privatized, and they are depending on a private company. Many other things that we need to really discuss and understand, and we're going to hit those high notes when we come back from this break. We'll be right back. You are listening to From the Legal Side, a production of Private Officer International, a private security and law enforcement organization since 2004. We'll be right back.
27 object, both the victim and the suspect here on 3rd Street.
134 be advised, Mary Queen, please come in closely with the suspect and the victim. West.
Anyone, 3-1.
Driving in ice and snowy conditions can be very challenging. Follow these tips to ensure you arrive at your destination safely. Before winter weather arrives, have a qualified technician give your vehicle a complete checkup. Make certain your tires are properly inflated. Never warm up a vehicle in an enclosed space, such as a garage. Keep your gas tank at least half full to avoid gas line freeze-up. Keep an extra blanket, winter coat, hat, and gloves in your car. Avoid driving while fatigued. Always wear your seatbelt. If possible, avoid using your parking brake in cold, rainy, and snowy weather. Do not use cruise control when driving on slippery surfaces. And always look and steer where you want the front of your vehicle to go. To maximize your driving safety, be aware of road conditions and don't drive in winter weather if at all possible. If you must drive in snow, reduce speed appropriately and be prepared for challenging situations. This has been a public service announcement from Christiansburg Rescue and Montgomery County Emergency Management.
From coast to coast, cops are cracking down on seatbelt violations. Buckle up day and night or expect a ticket. It doesn't matter who you are or where you live, they'll be on the lookout. Cops write tickets to save lives. Click it for ticket.
All right, welcome back to this edition of From the Legal Side, a production of Private Officer International. And we were talking before the break about really getting everything down firm on paper when we're hiring off-duty law enforcement, whether it be a deputy sheriff, a state trooper, or a local city police officer or constable. It's important to have that contract. It's important to have document of insurance, both general liability and workers' comp, just like if you were hiring any other subcontractor. Now let's talk a little bit about, are they the agent of the property or are they the agent of the employee on duty? Over the last couple of months, we've seen a number of issues that have arisen while off-duty officers have been on the property. In a recent arrest of a bowling alley employee for allegedly assaulting the officer, it all really began because the officer told a customer that they couldn't come back at the bowling alley. I don't know what was done. I don't know what was happened. It wasn't really a criminal offense. But the off-duty police officer working security that night at the bowling alley took it upon himself to, get the guy who, he may have had a conflict with or a problem and get him to leave the property. Well, the on-duty employee of the bowling alley said, no, he don't got to leave. I don't want him to leave. It's over. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. He can come back. And as he was telling the customer, come on back in, don't worry about it, the police officer stepped between them. And he said, no, I said he's not coming back in. And he got up face-to-face with the employee. Of course, I wasn't there. I don't know the exact details, only what's been written. And the employee said, I don't care what you said. You don't work here. I work here. And I'm paraphrasing now, but, words were exchanged. The officer said that the employee of the bowling alley touched him with a finger. And at that point, the officer, who was off duty, immediately put the employee of the bowling alley into custody and handcuffed him and arrested him for assaulting law enforcement. Was this really necessary? Some citizens commented, does he have that authority to do that? He's off duty. Does he even have police authority? So let's cover 3 things about this particular incident. Number 1, the employee is the agent of the property. Anytime that you're hiring off-duty law enforcement, they're not an employee of the property. They're not an agent, direct or indirect, of the property. They are there at the service of the company and the company's representative, which at this point is the employee. What the officer's job scope at that time is whatever the employee tells him it is. If it's to go guard the bathroom, that's his scope of duty. That's his job, just like if he was working for G4S or any other security company. If the employee says, I want you to stand outside and just patrol the parking lot because we have teenagers out there, that's what he has to do. He's not self-directed. The off-duty officer is not in control of what he's doing. You see, when a police officer, a deputy sheriff, a law enforcement officer is on duty, unless he has a call from the dispatcher, he can pretty much direct himself to doing whatever he wants to do. If he wants to run radar for a half hour, as long as he doesn't have any calls pending, he can do that. If he wants to chase gangbangers and get out with people that's loitering, he can do that. He can patrol on foot or vehicle as long as he's not assigned any direct calls from the dispatch center. But when that officer is working directly for a company, a business, then he is on their clock. He's on their payroll, and he has to do what he is told. Just like when he's on duty with the police or sheriff's department, the sergeant, lieutenant, the commander can direct him to do something different than what he's doing. He might want to do traffic control for an hour, but the sergeant might say, I don't want you there. I want you on high-intensity patrol over at this block over there. I want you on foot beat over here where there's a crowd of people. I want you to direct your attention to XYZ. And that's what he has to do because he's an employee, not an employer. At the bowling alley, the law enforcement officer off duty, he is there at the pleasure and service of the bowling alley owner or the agent, which in this case was the clerk of the bowling alley. So really, technically, he should not have made that decision to eject somebody from the property without the permission or authority of the employees on duty. If a crime is in progress and an off-duty officer sees it or has been called over to it, as long as he is within his jurisdiction where he is commissioned, sworn in, then he can make an arrest of anybody for anything, just like if he was on duty at the PD or the SO. However, if for whatever reason he's a police officer in XYZ town and he's working off duty in the neighboring town, then he has no authority unless in that particular situation they have, as does happen sometimes, they have crossover jurisdiction where they've been sworn in by neighboring agencies for times when they need assistance. So, but most of the time they're going to have jurisdiction only within their town, city, or county. Unless they are state troopers, then they have statewide authority, as do all state law enforcement, including state park rangers and others who have state police commission. So, in this situation, I think the officer overstepped his boundary, but again, that was probably made possible because there was no contract, there was nothing in writing as far as what his scope of duties were, and it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Hey, yeah, you're going to work, from 6 to 10, blah, blah, blah. We're going to pay you $35 an hour. Okay, good to go. It is important to have a written contract as well as something in writing that gives that officer a scope of duties, what you want him to do. And the employee on duty, whether it be a supervisor, manager, or just an hourly employee, needs to be able to kind of stay on top of what the officer is doing and making sure that he is doing exactly what the owner of the property wants him to do. If you want him in the parking lot all night and he's hanging around the snack bar talking to the girls, that's not helping your business. No different than if you had somebody else in that position. So you got to speak up, and you have to tell him in a nice way, hopefully, what his duties are and where you expect him to be. He is not the agent of the property. He does not have control of the property. He does not make any property rules. He does not set policies. He is working for the management, employee, or owner of the property, and thus he is not the agent legally of the property. He can enforce both misdemeanor and felony violations of the law if he sees it or if he's been called into it, and you would expect that he's going to do his due diligence, and if an arrest is necessary, he'll make that arrest. Now, there are going to be some exceptions, and this is something that businesses, churches, and private property owners frequently do not understand. On most, in fact, misdemeanors, including disorderly conduct, public intoxication, minor assaults, shoplifting, blah, 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 most of the time, the officer has discretion whether or not he's going to arrest a person if it's something that he has seen and that he has initiated. But if it's something that you, the property owner, you, the agent of the property, you, the manager on duty, have seen, and you file a complaint with the officer and you say, look, he broke my display case, he stole XYZ, then the officer has to make the arrest based on your complaint. And depending on what jurisdiction you're in, it may be that you have to go get an arrest warrant for the magistrate's office before he can do that. In other jurisdictions, as long as he can ascertain that a crime has been committed and he has probable cause to make the arrest, then he can take that person into custody and call an on-duty officer to transport. Every jurisdiction is going to be different. That's why we always tell you, understand the law of the land, understand what your state statutes are, understand how your agency procedures and policies work, because every department is going to be different. Every county is going to be different. State statutes are different from state to state, and you have to really stay on top of that. Another situation that occurred a couple of months ago at a 7-Eleven store, a clerk was arrested. He was arrested because he did sell alcohol to a minor, but the minor had forged ID, and there was really no way for the 7-Eleven clerk to know that it was fake. He's not a professional law enforcement officer. He didn't have any kind of book to compare it to. But the police officer on duty working that night security, again, he was supposed to be outside controlling the drunks from hanging out, people loitering and that kind of thing. He was looking when this transaction occurred. He stopped the teenager when he came out of the store, checked him for ID, ultimately arrested him, and then arrested the store clerk. I don't know what happened in court. Maybe it was dropped. Maybe the store clerk pled guilty. I'm not sure. In this situation, the off-duty officer working at the 7-Eleven, he did have authority to make that arrest, and he did observe a crime in progress. So when you're working with law enforcement, whether it be, somebody who's off-duty or on-duty, be prepared that if you are breaking the law, then you could possibly become a person arrested right then and there while you're, on the clock, even though you're employing that off-duty officer for your property. It's just the way it goes. Another incident happened. This was an on-duty officer about a month ago. You may have seen it on the media. It was national news. A school resource officer ticketed a principal for parking in the handicap, well within his right, well within the scope of his duties, his authority, and I think it was a legitimate ticket. But as soon as the principal found out about it, the SRO was called to the office and asked to leave the premise. Even though the SRO was working for the city police department and it was a city school, he didn't really have to leave because he had been assigned there by the police department and he'd done nothing wrong. He did, however, pack up his little box of stuff and he left. Whenever you're working with on-duty or off-duty officers on private property, schools, churches, businesses, there's going to be times when the officer is going to do his job. Number one, he's a law enforcement officer first. And that's what a lot of people do not understand about police. Their main job is not counseling. Their main job is not consoling. Their main job is not being a counselor. The main job of a police officer is that of a law enforcement officer. And these days, many people come to expect them to be something different than they really are. Although the job is taking on many different avenues and meanings over the last 10 to 15, 20 years, and every day police officers are expected to be a whole lot more than what they're trained to be. And times are changing. I understand that. Everybody that's in law enforcement understands that. But at the end of the day, the law enforcement officer is a law enforcement officer, and if he sees crime in progress, if he sees somebody that has broken the law, his number one job is to investigate and determine whether or not, an arrest should be made, or maybe a report filled out and passed on to an on-duty officer or an investigator, detective. But nonetheless, the police officer, even off-duty, does have not only the authority to make arrests and to investigate crimes in progress or crimes that may have occurred, he has a duty to do so. And any less would be a dereliction of duty. It would be a criminal offense. It could get him fired or even arrested. And off-duty, on-duty, whatever the case might be, he has to do his job. Having a written contract or an agreement with that officer will help to alleviate any situations where there's going to be a misunderstanding. Having something in that agreement that says scope of duties, what you want the officer to do. Now, you cannot put in there, I don't want you to make any arrests on my property. I've seen that before. I've seen, stores, bars, yeah, we don't want anybody arrested here. Too bad. Don't hire a police officer, hire a security officer. Because a police officer is going to make arrests if it's necessary. You just can't put that, in an agreement or a contract. But you do want to have some type of job duties and scope of authority within something that's going to be an agreement or a contract, and it's necessary to have spelled out. Make sure you have him sign it or her sign it. Make sure you have a copy, they have a copy. And you can use that for other officers that are there. If you're working within a secondary employment unit of a police department, more than likely, like I said earlier, they're probably going to have some type of form for you to sign. Make sure that you read everything on that paper. Because, like all contracts, it's going to be written for the benefit of the agency, not the benefit of the business employing the police officer. Just like if you had an agreement of any type, a contract, you would want that to really be in your favor and not in the other person's favor. Employing private police officers. There are many community states that now have special police and private police, company police, as they're called in North Carolina. They do have certain authority. For the most part, many of them are going to be part of a security agency, although some do have their own private law enforcement agencies. I know that's maybe strange or hard to get a handle on, but it's the way that really our country and other countries are progressing. Many private law enforcement officers have their own private agencies, and their authority, depending on their community, may be limited to the property that they're on duty at or have a contract agreement with. In some areas, their authority is within the city or county, and they can make arrests any place within the scope of their duties and authority within that city or county. And you're going to have police agencies or private police agencies that have just as much authority as any city or county law enforcement. Again, you want to make sure they have insurance. They have both general liability and workers' comp. You want to make sure that you have some kind of signed agreement with them. Doesn't matter if they're going to be directing traffic or making arrests or, in North Carolina and Virginia and D.C. and Maryland and other states. Massachusetts is a big one for special police. New York, they're called peace officers. Many communities use private police, so it is possible that a private police or an FPO will be used in place of a law enforcement agency police officer or deputy sheriff. But just make sure that everything, that I said about law enforcement agreements and contracts and scope of authority and duties and et cetera, make sure that's enforced and applied to them, the private police officer, as well. Whenever you have people working for you, whether it's a direct employee, a subcontractor, an indirect employee, you got to have certain things in place where there's going to be understanding, where there's going to be documentation, and it really is going to alleviate a lot of problems. It's going to alleviate misunderstandings. It's going to alleviate bad feelings. It's going to get rid of the most possibilities of being sued by one person or the other. And it's also going to make you feel better at night because you have things in place. You know that people are insured, they have contracts, and they, for the most part, know what their job is, and it makes things go a lot smoother, a lot easier. And I recommend that if you don't know about all of this, that you get a hold of an attorney and get somebody, a business lawyer, not just a divorce lawyer, an ambulance chaser, or somebody who just has general law. Everybody that goes to law school, by the way, gets the same degree. They get a Juris Doctorate, but they're not specialists. But some do come out of law school, and once they get their local law license, they do practice in different areas just like a doctor. So make sure you have somebody who knows about liability and business law and get them involved if you're just not sure of what to do. That's going to conclude this episode of From the Legal Side. Now, if you're a private officer international member, or you want to be, and you have an issue about secondary employment off-duty officers, whether at your business or that you want to employ for a special event, and you're not sure exactly all the ABCs of it, the ins and outs, you can contact us, helpdesk@privateofficer.com, helpdesk@privateofficer.com. We'll be glad to not only help you out, but we also have some sample agreements and other information that we can pass along to you. That's going to do it for this episode of From the Legal Side, or On the Legal Side, and we're also going to be back on the air just in a couple of days with the Private Officer B. Until then, be safe, be blessed, and we'll see you right back here on the radio.